Hi, welcome to another episode of Vivid Q&A. Our topic today is protein skimmers, and all these questions come to us from our friends on Facebook. Raid asks, how important are protein skimmers for nanos? Well, Raid, I can tell you that for a nanocube, you definitely can achieve low nitrate levels just by doing a little bit more when you do a water change, by changing a little bit more water. A protein skimmer will help to add some dissolved oxygen into the water and will lessen the need for such frequent water changes. So it's up to you. Either way can be very effective. Now, Raid also asks, which would be better for nanocubes, a protein skimmer with live rock or live rock plus a hang-on-the-back refugium? Well, in my opinion, I'd probably go with a protein skimmer and live rock. A hang-on-the-back refugium for a nano is usually going to be pretty small, and it's going to be hard to make a very noticeable impact on the nitrate levels with such a small refugium. So my choice would be go to the skimmer and live rock, or no skimmer, just use live rock and do a little bit more in the way of your water change. Now Jason asks, is a small skimmer pulling out a lot of skimmate just as good as a more appropriate size skimmer, sized correctly for the tank? Well, Jason, I can tell you it all comes down to your nitrate level. If the nitrate is low and under control with your small skimmer that's pulling out a lot of skimmate, then you're good to go. You don't need to upgrade the skimmer. If you're having trouble keeping the nitrate level down, you're having to do a lot of water changes to keep up with it. In that case, I'd recommend upgrading the skimmer to something suited for your size of aquarium. Now Carson asks, can a protein skimmer be too big? He wants one rated for a 500-gallon tank to put on his 55-gallon tank because he says that's the biggest one he can fit in his sump. Now, is there a downside to having one too big? Well, Carson, I could say I wouldn't go 10 times the size of your tank. You know, if you have, for instance, a 100-gallon tank, getting a skimmer rated for 100 to 200 gallons would make sense. And I'd probably recommend a skimmer rated for about double the size of your display, 1.5 to 2 times the size of your display, but not bigger than that. If you go too big, the skimmer's going to clean the water, and within a few days, it's not going to have much left to clean, and the skimmer's not going to want to flow up and collect into the cup. So definitely 1.5 to 2 times the size of your display would make sense. Other than that, I wouldn't go too extreme with it. He also says, is there a difference between pinwheel and cone skimmers? Is one better? And what's the difference between internal and external skimmers? Well, cone skimmers can utilize pinwheel or needle wheel pumps to mix air inside them. And in terms of internal or external skimmers, you want to consider the space and size of your layout. For an internal or in-sump skimmer, you need a larger sump area to house the skimmer. And for an external skimmer, you need space in your aquarium stand to house it. So you got to look at the layout of your setup, but I wouldn't say internal or external is better than one or the other. Both work very well. It's just a matter of the space you have for your layout. Nathan asks, what skimmer would you recommend for nano tanks under 30 gallons? Well, two of our top picks currently are the Hydrocoralia Nano skimmer and the Tunzi 9002 Nano skimmer. Both of these work very well, and we've had great success with them here. Now Dean asks, what is better for a 20-gallon nano tank, a hang-on-the-back skimmer or an in-sump skimmer? Well, for a nano tank, your sump is usually the limited space in the back of the aquarium. So a hang-on skimmer, you would be able to oversize it a bit more and get a skimmer rated for something larger than your aquarium. So probably a hang on the back, if you have space behind the aquarium to hang it, would be a little bit better option for you. Now Akil asks, we add a lot of trace elements every week and shut down the skimmer for a day or so after we dose. Will the skimmer skim those trace elements out when we turn it back on? Well, protein skimmers can remove trace elements over time, but usually you're going to replenish them with water changes if you use a good salt mix, and you can always dose them back into the aquarium, so it's definitely not a major concern. I do recommend keeping the skimmer running pretty much 24/7 and let it keep that water clean and reduce your need for water changes. Now Don asks, what size skimmer would you suggest for a 75-gallon tank, and how often should you clean it? Well, Don, for a 75-gallon tank, you probably want something rated for around 120 to 150 gallons. And in terms of how often you clean the cup, usually you'll clean it about every 4 to 7 days, depending on which model you pick out. But obviously, as the cup starts to fill, you're going to need to clean it and empty it out. Now, Kenneth asks, on our display tank, that big one behind us, I'm guessing you're talking about, do we skim wet or dry, and what are the pros and cons from my perspective? This is a very good question. Wet skimming basically is when you set up the protein skimmer so that the water will flow into the cup, or the liquid will flow into the cup, and you have a very liquidy, runny skimmate. This is going to remove more dissolved waste from the aquarium than a dry skim. On a dry skim, you keep the level in the skimmer lower so that what collects in the collection cup is a thick, mucky, mud-like skimmate. So with a wet skim, you're going to have to empty the collection cup a lot more often. With a dry skim, you're not going to have to empty the collection cup as often, but it's not going to be as thorough of a skim. Something to consider though, if you do a wet skim on an aquarium that has an automatic top-off system and your skimmer cup has a drain where it drains out of the cup, you do run a serious risk of draining water from your system and then having your top-off fill it with fresh, reducing your salinity. And this, if left alone, can actually kill corals in the tank if you drop your salinity too low. So be careful about doing that. Now Chris asked, to go into Kenneth's questions, go over the differences between wet and dry skimming. Well, I think we did that. So wet skim, you're going to let the levels be higher. The liquid or skimming will be much more liquidy. For a dry skim, you keep the level in the skimmer lower, and you're going to have a thicker, muckier skimmate. Now Andrew asks, is it best for a skimmer to be at the start of the sump or the end? And should I turn it off a bit when feeding the corals? Well, I prefer to put the skimmer towards the beginning of the sump. Usually we'll have our drain lines, our filter socks, then the protein skimmer. The reason for this is that any skimmer is going to outlet microbubbles into the sump to some degree. So you want to have a chance to break up those bubbles by sending the water through a few weirs before it gets sucked into the return pumps and pushed into the display. That way you don't have all these microbubbles in your display. Now, in terms of turning off the skimmer when you feed corals, it's a good idea if you're not as lazy as I am. Sometimes I do prefer to leave it on just because while the skimmer may remove a small amount of the food you feed the corals, it's usually not a big amount. So for me, I leave it on, but definitely there's nothing wrong with turning it off while you feed corals. It's going to let the food in the water a little bit longer so they can be fully used by the corals. And now Matthew asks, I cannot fit a sump under my tank, so are there any limitations to having a hang-on skimmer? Well, the limitations for a hang-on skimmer means a lot of times you may need extra space behind the aquarium between the tank and the wall. And hang-on skimmers usually don't come in sizes as large as something that might fit in the sump or externally. Any major limitations? Now, Patrick asks, should the skimmer be sat directly at the bottom of the sump or elevated slightly? It depends what kind of skimmer you have. Most protein skimmers prefer to run in like 6 to 8 inches of water, but I definitely consult the directions that come with it to see what the manufacturer recommends and put it in that much water. So if you have a skimmer that's supposed to be in 6 inches of water, your sump runs 10 inches deep, in that case you might want to elevate it 4 inches so that it's sitting essentially in the 6 inches of water. Now Willy asks, how does the self-cleaning collection cups work? Where does the waste go? And where does the clean water come from? Well, Willy, a good question. Deltec and some other brands have come out with self-cleaning heads that work for their protein skimmers. To do this, you need to connect a solenoid from a fresh water line to the collection cup. And what happens is that solenoid will be triggered via a computer controller to come on, say, once every couple of hours and shoot fresh water into the skimmer cup. It has a brush it'll swirl around to clean it, and then that skimmer cup is plumbed to a drain line of the home. So to do this, you need a water line and a drain line. You need a solenoid, and you need a controller like ProFlux computer controller of some sort that'll turn that solenoid on and off for you. So basically that's it. The water line, water's coming from the home. It's draining back to the drain of the home. And they actually work really well. I've had these in operation with Deltec self-cleaning heads where you haven't had to touch a skimmer for 4 to 5 months at a time, which is pretty nice, definitely. Now, Amos asks the proper water level in the sump and where to set the bubbles in the skimmer. Well, water level in the sump will depend some on your specific sump, but I usually run it at least 2 inches above the height of the weirs, so usually 8 to 10 inches deep. And where to set the bubbles in the skimmer depends if you're going for a wet skim or a dry skim or something in between. But again, you just want to pay attention to how quickly that skimmer cup fills up and keep it emptied properly. And Jamie asks, where's the best place to have your water line on a comb skimmer for most efficient skimming? Again, Jamie, this relates to, do you want a wet skim or dry skim? Usually somewhere in between is good for most hobbyists, so just have to play around with it, see how quick the cup fills up. If it's filling up every day, you're probably going a little too wet. And if it's taken 2 weeks to fill up, you're probably a little too dry. So usually you want to plan on emptying the cup every 4 to 7 days, let's say. Now Andrew asks, is there a rule of thumb for purchasing the right size skimmer? Again, Andrew, I'd say usually 1.5 to 2 times the size of your display tank is perfect. You're going to have plenty of skimmer to handle and keep the tank clean. Don't need to go bigger than that. Going smaller than that just means you might have to do a little bit more in the way of water changes. Now, Marcus asks, my question is, do I really need a protein skimmer? I don't use one, and all my corals look healthy, and they're growing like weeds. Well, Marcus, if it works, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. I can tell you, if your corals are growing well, the tank's healthy without the skimmer. You may be okay without it. You are going to get some oxygenation in the water from your overflow and the water draining down, so that could be enough to keep things going. Just keep an eye on your nitrate levels. If they're staying in check, you're probably good as you are. Now, Joe asks, how can you tell if a skimmer is pulling enough organics out of your system? Very simple, Joe. Just test your levels. If the nitrates are under control, your skimmer is definitely then removing enough of the organics out of the system. Now Sam asks, how well do I clean the skimmer cup? Is cleaning the cone down to the squeaky clean plastic causing the skimmer to re-break in, or should I leave a little bit of that slime gunk buildup so it can still pull out waste? Well, Sam, actually a clean skimmer, if you keep the neck clean and the riser tube into the collection cup clean, the skimmers do run more efficiently. So cleaning it good is definitely a good thing. You're not going to cause it to re-break in. Just give it a good clean. And Andrew asks, normally spray my skimmer cup out with a sink hose to clean off most of the gunk. I don't wipe down or use any chemicals or anything. Could I be doing it wrong? No, I think you're doing a great job. Just wipe it down clean. Definitely do not want to use any chemicals. And that's all you need. Brian asked, for nano tanks, I have a 29-gallon BioCube. Is a small skimmer that came with it sufficient? I also have a larger skimmer for my 90-gallon tank. Should I use that or get something rated in the middle? Well, if the skimmer that came with your BioCube is keeping your nitrates under control, then I'd definitely say it is sufficient. If it's not and you're having to do excessive water changes, in that case, you might get a skimmer maybe rated for 50, 60 gallons, but I think 90 gallons might be pushing it a little much for a nano cube. Now, Eric asks, what's more important when shopping for a skimmer, air draw per hour or water gallons per hour? Well, Eric, I don't think either one is more important than the other because both of them combined is what makes the skimmer function. So you need a skimmer that draws in a bunch of air and is really good at putting those bubbles and mixing them in with the water. And also the skimmer is passing enough water from your system through it and getting it clean. So look for a skimmer that can do both, and most of them out on the market today will do that. Robert asks, I'd like to ask if my skimmer is, say, for a 125-gallon or 180-gallon tank or 600-gallon tank, how do I know if that is the max for a SPS tank or just a fish tank, or is that for a mixed reef? I don't seem clear about it. Well, Robert, you want to consider when you're buying a protein skimmer about the bioload you plan to keep in the aquarium. Corals, for instance, aren't going to create a lot of waste in the aquarium, very little, but fish obviously do. So if you plan to have a tank that's packed with a lot of fish and you want to overpack it even a little bit, in that case, you want to oversize it. So maybe then for a 200-gallon tank, you're going to get a skimmer rated for 400 or 500 gallons. But if you can have a normal bioload in a 200-gallon tank, then getting someone rated for 250, 300 gallons is going to be perfectly sufficient. And final question here, Kelly asks, do you think JBJ Nano skimmer would be a benefit for a 28-gallon nano tank for soft coral? Definitely, again, it's going to reduce the need for water changes, but how much of an impact or how much of a help it's going to have, can't say it's going to be a tremendous impact, but worthwhile nonetheless. Well, guys, appreciate you watching, taking the time to watch this video. Keep those questions coming. Appreciate you posting them all on Facebook, and we'll certainly keep these videos coming. I look forward to the next one. Thanks, guys.